What's going on, Whisper Nation? We are back finally after the 24-hour mock draft marathon. We are ready to roll, and we are talking about the top 10 quarterbacks for this season. We're going to let you know what our rankings are. Aaron Rodgers is now back. He's in camp. How does that affect our rankings? We're going to talk about all that and more on this episode of the Fantasy Whispers.
Right here.
That's right, Whisper Nation. We are back. The Fantasy Whispers here to talk the top 10 fantasy football quarterbacks for 2021. But if you're new to the Fantasy Whispers, why don't you give us a like, give us a subscribe on your way in. Let us know that you're new to the channel in the chat, and we will shout you guys out as such. We are the Fantasy Whispers, Big Travy over here, Johnny Game Time Hicks on the other mic. You can find us on Twitter at Big Travy TFW, at Johnny Game Time or Johnny_Game Time. And we are talking those top 10 fantasy QBs. Johnny, we're back after the mock draft marathon. My voice is so much better than it was just 24 hours ago. But for those 24 hours, it took a beating on my voice. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, we turned into Jay and Silent Bob on the 24-hour mock draft marathon, but it's great to have your voice, coming back. It's getting there. They can't listen to two raspy voices for too long.
No,
yeah,
it's too much on the ears. But
yeah,
like I said, Whisper Nation, if you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit us with a like, hit us with a subscribe. We got ML in here saying, yeah, baby, we got people watching. Get those likes up. We appreciate you. We are now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter via Periscope, and Twitch streaming live. So all of those channels up right now. So let us know which one you're watching on and what's going on. And we're going to get into those top 10 QBs straight from our Fantasy Whispers draft kit, which you can find at thefantasywhispers.com and download for an industry low $15 today. But first, Johnny, let's talk some news and nuggets. All right, you know the drill here. I'm gonna rattle off some news for you, and you're gonna tell me which one you think has the most impact fantasy football wise for this season. Obviously, the big one is Aaron Rodgers back at camp. We kind of knew this was going to happen. It was just a matter of what needed to happen on each side to make it happen. But he came back day one, ready to rock and roll. So that's the biggest piece of news. There's another piece, related to that. The Texans will trade Randall Cobb to the Packers, bringing the veteran back to Green Bay to play with Aaron Rodgers. Trey Wingo's first mentioned this as a possibility. Now it's really happening. Cobb announced on his Twitter that the deal is done. Jalen Hurts, his first throw of training camp was a touchdown to Miles Sanders. Not so much news as it is hype. People trying to doubt Jalen Hurts, and we'll talk about him in our rankings here, but was able to get that done in his first throw. The Dolphins often, yeah, I'm sure you do. We'll get to talking about those rankings here in a second. The Dolphins often injured wide receiver Devontae Parker opens camp on the PUP list along with three others. So that's some news to monitor as we've been taking Devontae Parker as a nice value play in a lot of drafts this offseason. He's going to open on, at least to start camp on the PUP. Wide receiver Elijah Moore, another wide receiver for the Jets that's been garnering a lot of hype, opened with this Jets second team to start camp. Obviously, first few days of camp, so don't want to overstate this, but that is something to monitor. And then finally, Johnny, the biggest piece of news, or the last piece of news we have here, Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson tests positive for COVID-19. Johnny, of those things that we're talking about, which one do you think has the most impact heading into the 2021 season?
I have to say it's the Lamar Jackson being placed on the COVID list, right? Now we have to wait this process out, and we'll see how long he is on that list. Of course, it's never good to be starting out training camp missing time, right? Whether it's injury or whether it's on this COVID list. We weren't really sure how much COVID was going to affect this season. Cases are starting to climb back up. So it's definitely something we're going to want to monitor, especially because of the news and information that's coming out about the COVID protocol this year. And, last year, Travis, they talked about, if there was a COVID outbreak or whatnot, the teams would shut down. They would reschedule for a later date. However, that's not the case this year. This year, they're saying that NFL teams are saying, hey, if your team gets an outbreak in COVID, then you're going to forfeit that game. It is what it is. It's a loss for you guys and a win for the other team. So this could actually have a lot more ramifications than we tend to believe. We also, what we've seen too from a few cases, right? Majorly Cam Newton. Now, whether or not that was related to COVID or he just, fell off a cliff, that's still to be seen. But we have heard certain players say, hey, when we came back from COVID, it wasn't, hit the ground running. They had to deal with some after effects. We also saw that with the NBA and CP3, similar thing. Came back from COVID after getting the shot and everything, and he still wasn't his normal self. So this is big news to me. I haven't yet moved him down in my projections, Travis. We're going to dive into these top 12 quarterback projections. As of right now, I'm not necessarily putting down moving him down in rankings, but it is something I'm going to continue to monitor, and I might move him down if this continues to be a problem and we continue to see him kind of work back pretty slowly.
Yeah, it's a fair point. We'll see what effect this has. Scott Scobie coming in from Periscope just wanted to add that Jalen Waddle will be a major riser if Parker is not going to play week 1.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. That is an excellent point as we talk about Devontae Parker slipping back because of the pup status. A lot of big news, and we'll continue to monitor right here on the Fantasy Whispers. Keep tuning into our daily live shows, and we will help you continue to go through that. We're going to talk those top 10 fantasy quarterbacks, as we said. But before we do, Whisper Nation, I need to let you know it's that time of year again. We're about to roll into August. It's about to be draft season officially for your fantasy football leagues. And the Fantasy Whispers draft kit is here, and it's better than ever this year. Our draft kit is fully loaded with premium player projections, rankings, consistency charts, and over 3 years worth of data, cheat sheets, strength of schedule charts, and so much more. The TFW draft kit is available at an industry low $15. So head on over to thefantasywhispers.com to get your draft kit today. We will also be posting that link within the chat as well. I also need to remind everybody, we're about to push that update out, our first update of the season. That'll include Aaron Rodgers back to camp. That'll include Michael Thomas, obviously the news with that, Cam Akers. All the adjustments are going to be built in there. So we're going to be shooting that out to you guys and make sure that's up to date. So make sure you get on over to thefantasywhispers.com. Follow that link in the chat if you're live right now, and you guys can get your kit today. Johnny, it's time. Let's get into this top 10. And we might get a little bit of flack for you being a homer here, but Kyler Murray, we think he's ready to take this top spot, and we have him ranked as such. The industry has him going from the 4th round at 4-6 as QB3, but the Fantasy Whispers are behind Kyler Murray as their number 1 quarterback. And why not? Last year, Johnny, almost 4,000 passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. I think the biggest thing I wanted to highlight here is something that Ian Hartitz brought up a couple months ago. Most fantasy points per game in a single season from a quarterback in history. Number 1 was 2019 Lamar Jackson with 27. If you look at Dak Prescott's small sample size last year at 2020, he was number 2 at 26.9. Aaron Rodgers was number 3 in 2011 with 26.5. Mahomes in 2018 had 26.1, and Mike Vick in 2010 had 25.9. But 2020's Kyler Murray in weeks 1 through 10, before that shoulder injury, you've heard us talk a lot about this. He was on pace to get 29.3 points per game, almost 2 points better than the greatest fantasy season of all time at the quarterback position. I don't think people realize how much Kyler's ceiling hadn't even been touched yet prior to that injury. And so we're excited. You talk about that. Plus they bring in Rondale Moore. They bring in AJ Green. Johnny, what are we seeing here when we look at Kyler Murray's 2021 outlook?
I mean, Travis, you're looking at a guy, you talked about that week 11 injury, right? Up until that week, his lowest quarterback finish was quarterback 7. He had never, other than that, it was like quarterback 5. He'd done several times, quarterback 1, quarterback 2. He was flirting back and forth with that number 1 overall quarterback spot up until that shoulder injury. Now, what we have heard from camp is that Kyler wants to, run less. So, some people were scared a little bit off of his rushing upside. And, we have to realize, like, this guy he was on pace to get over 1,000 rushing yards last year. That was the realistic possibility of what he could do. And then you're looking at a cannon for an arm. He gets more offensive weapons, AJ Green, Rondale Moore. And the rushing, he had over 10 rushing touchdowns last year. Now, can he repeat some of those things? Even if that rushing yardage comes down, he's a very smart runner. So I think by what he's talking about there is he wants to be a little bit more smarter when he runs and not run as frequent or have quarterback draws as often. but the touchdown upside is still there because he will still pull. He did that in college a significant amount, and you talked about those added weapons. I think it's all going to come together for Kyler this year, and he's one of my favorite quarterbacks to target because he's not going number one. He's not going number two in most cases because Josh Allen is usually a second guy off the board. And so for me, I just think that this, is a perfect marriage between his ADP and his draft capital versus the upside that you could potentially get with a guy like Kyler. And once again, you're looking for that the consistency from week to week. And the reality is when Kyler is not injured, he is a solid QB1 because he has such a high floor with that rushing, and then he has the upside with the arm. And so I think he puts it all together. I think this is the third year in this system, and I think he really caps on, catapults himself into that QB1 position.
Well, if we have Kyler Murray as our QB1, that means Patrick Mahomes slid down against most consensus. If we look at where Patrick Mahomes is going, based on average draft position, that's in the second round, the end of the second round at 211, and he is the QB1 by consensus rankings, but we have him as our second QB. Johnny, I think this just came down to consistency for you, right? Like when we look at the consistency charts with Patrick Mahomes, he has just not been as consistent as that number one overall as we'd like. And really the ceiling is, I'd say maybe the floor is there, or the ceiling is there for Patrick Mahomes week to week, but the floor just has not been the same for him. Speak to that and what we saw in the consistency charts when we broke down for the 2021 draft kit.
Yeah, honestly, this is one of the biggest takeaways that I took from the draft kit, right? When doing this, I did not project or expect Pat Mahomes to be that inconsistent. I was a huge fan of Pat Mahomes. I took him in several leagues last year in the first and second round, which a lot of people did not, would not do or didn't expect, from me. And there was a combination of things. I wanted a really solid quarterback that I didn't have to worry about. I would rather worry about other positions. And, I just wanted that. He's exciting to watch. And you have that tremendous game every single week. You have that upside of, could Pat Mahomes go for 40 to 50 plus points? That is still, in his realm of possibilities. However, after diving into his consistency charts over the last 2 years, Travis, and finding that only 65% of his games was he a top 12 quarterback. Like that's, as you dive into these even more, Travis, thinking about, well, if you're drafting him number one and he's even giving you, 12 in a 12-man league, that's last as far as your starting quarterbacks in theory. And so for me, when I'm looking at, draft capital and consistency in those early rounds, I have since flipped the script on drafting Pat Mahomes. And I've been telling people, hey, I'm a little bit further off on Pat Mahomes just because of that weekly consistency. At the end of the year, is he probably going to be a top 3 quarterback? Yes, he'll probably score that many fantasy points. But we also have to realize, like, this isn't just a yearly game. It's a week-to-week game. Unless you're in those season longs, that's it. Then it makes a little bit more sense to go after a guy like Pat Mahomes because you get all the points. But when you're looking at a week-to-week game, you need more consistency than that at the quarterback position because, frankly, this is the big point. You're never going to want to take Pat Mahomes out of your lineup if you draft him. You're looking at that, and you're going to say, well, every week he can go for 40 or 50. Why would I pull him out? But reality is only 65% of the time is he going to return you a QB1, and that's just not significant enough for me, especially when you're talking about a second or third round draft capital. It just, for that reason, like Shark Tank says, I'm out on Pat Mahomes this year. But I do encourage people that if you want, that high upside, because he does, from a strategy standpoint, make your opponents play a little bit different than, let's say, going with a guy like Ryan Tannehill, who we'll talk about a little bit later. He doesn't strike as much fear into opponents. So there's also that side of the coin that you have to look at. And it ultimately just comes down to what kind of fantasy player you want to be. And if you like doing the streamer or grabbing a couple quarterbacks or grabbing these later guys that we're going to talk about that have just as much on the consistency week to week finishes, then that's where I would go. But if you're not confident in that and you want an exciting quarterback to watch every single weekend, then there's no other player to be more excited and watch than Pat Mahomes. It's just fun to watch that guy and root for him.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some stuff built in here. Like if the offensive line is as retooled as they think it is, if the running game gets back on track, then yes, you could see a bounce back season. But we're not having to get that discount of if we're paying the same premium price we've paid for Pat Mahomes over the last 3 years, which is kind of a dangerous game, as you said, when you're giving up second round capital to go get a guy who hasn't really hit as much as we thought he would. We thought he was the guy to break the cycle, to be the guy that continuously is the number one, and it just wasn't the case. We saw Josh Allen last year, right? And so we're having to pay that premium. Scott brings up an interesting question to you, Johnny. How close is it between Kyler and Mahomes? And that's the question. Let's say in our draft kit, Johnny, you'd have to back me up. I don't think it's that far off, but the point is that we can get Kyler right now, as we talked about, in the third or fourth round. 406 is your QB3, where I'm having to pay 2 more rounds up to get Mahomes in the second. That is the difference. That is what we're talking about. We don't mind if you want to take Mahomes, just understand what that's going to do to your roster.
I just have them separated by 30 points. So basically about a point and a half per game, and not even that. So it's very close on a points per game basis on their ranking. But like you said, it comes down to draft capital and what you're getting for that draft capital. And instead of, a Kyler plus your second rounder at, whatever position, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, is most likely going to garner you more fantasy points and more consistency than, taking Pat and then whatever running back you land in, or wide receiver or tight end you land in the fourth.
All right, we're going to continue the trend of guys we've seen be the number one before, and that is Josh Allen, who's coming off his overall QB1 performance last year as our QB3. He's now taken in the ADP of 312, almost the fourth round, as QB2 off the board in most consensus scoring and drafting right now. Over 4,500 passing yards last year, 37 passing touchdowns, only 10 interceptions. Has never had more than 12 interceptions in a season. 421 rushing yards. That was actually the lowest of his career on 102 rushing attempts. 8 rushing touchdowns. He even had a receiving touchdown last year. 3 straight seasons of 8+ rushing touchdowns. I mean, this guy is just he's like a Mahomes meets Cam Newton, because he continues to rocket the ball down the field with great accuracy deep, but he also has rushing touchdown upside. We'll see if the Bills want to limit that, because they're trying to go ahead and run the ball more this year, but we'll see. They've never been able to do that with Josh Allen in the lineup yet. And I think, look, if you want to take Mahomes, if you're just itching to take a top-rated quarterback early, I'd say ditch Mahomes and go with Josh Allen, because you're going to get more rushing upside, which means he's got a propensity to be even better than Mahomes with the rushing upside. And you don't have to give up a second-round pick. You give up a third-round pick instead. I mean, our overall advice is going to be take Kyler Murray. But if you're saying, no, I can't do it, I really want to invest in somebody, it's Josh Allen to me, because he's coming off the board here as our third quarterback, but as the second quarterback in consensus.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, when you're breaking it down between Allen and Kyler, the thing you would probably trust a little bit more is like the coaching staff. Some people might not fully believe in Cliff Kingsbury. And so, going with a guy like Josh Allen, listen, he's a bigger body guy. He's less likely to get hurt or injured. And so, like, I have no qualms about you going, with Allen over Kyler. I think he does have the safer floor, but I do believe that Kyler does have the higher ceiling, because I believe he can get more rushing yards. And I think his rushing touchdowns, he can actually beat Josh Allen again in rushing touchdowns. There's always that question in the back of my head. Is this the year we've seen Josh Allen, 3 straight years over 8 rushing touchdowns? As he gets closer to that big money contract, does he, like you said, do they rely on the run a little bit more in the red zone and not allow Josh Allen to take that beating? I don't know if it's this year. Considering it is kind of his contract year, or it isn't kind of, it is his contract year. So that is something that is going to be in the back of his mind as he, tries to maximize this year and get the most. Something that was really interesting, Travis, that was brought up on another podcast, is talking about like how the NFL is starting to lean more towards a pass heavy offenses, because it makes more sense as far as analytics wise. And that's what you saw from the Buffalo Bills last year. You saw them go more pass heavy. Now, will more teams tend to do that? You're talking about a 60-40 split is what the Bills had. You would expect them to repeat that because it was a winning formula. And, it'll be interesting to see how more and more teams start going in that direction. But I want to leave it with this. In general, in fantasy football, you tend to want to try to get in front of the new wave as opposed to be chasing it. And what I mean by that is, Pat Mahomes had the 50 touchdown season, right? Everyone jumped on that. We started taking him high. It hasn't worked out, right? Speaking from a consistency week to week thing, hasn't worked out. Josh Allen was a 7th rounder last year, and he had all this upside as well, but people drafted him and it panned out. He was the number 1. It's very similar. We see this over and over again. You brought it up a little bit earlier where these quarterbacks don't repeat number 1s. And so, from that standpoint, from just probability, repeating or betting on Josh Allen to repeat, it would, odds would say it's not going to happen. But if there is a guy that we do believe could take that number 1 again, it would be a guy like Josh Allen because he has the rushing
he's
upside
just
and the
like
big arm.
To me, he's a combo of that Lamar Jackson upside with Patrick Mahomes. He's just the perfect kind of combo, which is what we see in Kyler as well. And I think it's just smart to bet on one of these guys like Kyler, Lamar, Rodgers, one of these guys, probably not as much Rodgers, but one of these guys that aren't Josh Allen to bet to repeat, because that's the situation we're dealing with right now. You want to not be the guy to be the first quarterback taken off the board. You also probably don't want to be the guy who takes the last quarterback off the board. You want to be somewhere in the middle. And I think we're going to talk about these guys between, ranked 2 through 6 or 7 in our rankings that are going to be the sweet spot money guys, the Daks, the Lamars, the Josh Allens and the Kylers that we're going to try and look to attack. I mean, look at Scott comes in here and says, I've gotten Kyler in the 5th and 6th in the drafts this season. Those are steals. And that's what we're talking about. If you sit yourself, hey, I'm not going to take Josh Allen early, but Josh Allen's sitting there in the 4th round and he's fallen in your draft, then you're in a situation where it's like, I might as well snag him here because that's the tilt of what he can do for your lineup. All right, we're going to talk about our number 4 quarterback off the board briefly. That's Lamar Jackson. ADP off the board is 501 as the quarterback 4. We've got him at 4. Nothing really to say here. 1,005 rushing yards on 159 rushing attempts and 7 rushing touchdowns. It's 2 straight years, Johnny, of 1,000 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Has never had a season with over 401 passing attempts, though. We think that they have done what they can to bring in passing weapons for this offense, but we can't really project Lamar to have a huge upgrade in the passing game because it just hasn't been what he's done. Can he get back to his MVP season? Probably not. It's not likely, but can he get a little bit better than last year or the year before? Yeah, we think he can. Lamar is now sitting in a nice little range, Johnny, where I could actually see drafting him as your starting quarterback this year and reaping the benefits fantasy-wise, because coming off in the 5th round, 5th, 6th, 7th round, that's where I want to attack quarterback. I know you've been kind of on the bandwagon that Lamar is not going to be a great passer, but it doesn't hinder his value as a fantasy quarterback. Can you speak a little bit to what you see out of Lamar for 2021?
Yeah, when it comes to Lamar, it's fantasy points are fantasy points. So whether he rushes for him or he throws for him, it makes no difference. And honestly, it's better when he runs because you get more points as a Konami code for fantasy football. So I like him as a fantasy quarterback. I didn't like him going so high last year, even though I took him in a league and made that, I didn't trust my gut and it hurt me. However, I want to preface that I like Lamar Jackson as a quarterback. I like him as a fantasy quarterback. I love where he's going now because, he's starting to fall. You're talking about even guy we don't have, which might surprise people on this list, but we don't have Russell Wilson ranked in our top 10. And, even Russell Wilson is coming off the board generally before a guy like Lamar. And so Lamar and, during the mock draft marathon, Travis, there were some times when Lamar was slipping to the 7th, 8th round, and I grabbed him because I was like, well, this is a value. Even if he doesn't, get back to that MVP season, he still is going to have that Konami code to where he's going to be able to give you those upside weeks and win you weeks. And so when you're talking about a draft capital that late, I'm back in, I don't like, we always say this, It's not that we don't like players, we just don't like the ADPs. And for me, for a while, it was that Lamar's ADP was just too high for what you're having to pay up for him, because he was going in like the same round as like a Kyler Murray or a Josh Allen. But now that's kind of cooled off a little bit. And so now I'm back in on him. I think that he does have that, upside. We'll see if these weapons help, get him a little bit more accuracy with the throwing as well as the contested catches. So that is something I'm looking forward to, but also keep monitored on this COVID situation, because depending on how this pans out, that could affect the rankings as well.
Yeah, we have to see how that's going to affect his play too. We saw
Right.
this with Cam Newton, as you said at the top of the show. It could really affect his play. Should affect his ADP in a positive way for us if we're looking to attack him towards our drafts or in our drafts this fall. All right, number 5, Aaron Rodgers is back in camp, and therefore he has catapulted himself back up into the top 5. Rightfully so. His ADP right now is 612. The industry catching up has him as QB8. I mean, last year was the MVP, 4,200 yards, 48 passing touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 3 straight years that Rodgers has thrown 5 or fewer interceptions, has finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback 6 of the last 7 years. 12 of his 16 games, he had 3 or more passing touchdowns. He's thrown for more than 4,000 yards in 4 out of 5 seasons. Look, this is the bottom line. Aaron Rodgers is really good at football. He's been really good at fantasy football. If you've had him, he's one of the few guys that doesn't run a lot, but still gets you plenty of great games because he doesn't throw picks, because he throws multiple touchdowns, because he's so efficient with the football. And this offense will now be going into year 3 under Matt LaFleur. They've added a couple weapons via the draft. They're going to bring Randall Cobb back. You know that Aaron Rodgers is going to be dialed in and ready to continue his pace, because he's now adjusted his contract such that he's going to have leverage with the Packers again at the end of this year, where there's mechanisms in place where they will review his contract at the end of this year to see if a trade is available, because he's still not happy, which means he's going to put on a show. Johnny, he's going to continue to put on a show until he can't anymore, because he wants to make sure that he is doing all that he can to prove to the Packers and the rest of the league that he still has what it takes. So that's exciting for fantasy football purposes. And for me, I think he's one of those perfect candidates. It's like if going in the 5th round or the 6th round's a little too early for you, for your liking, you still want to stack your other pieces depending on how you are as a fantasy GM. I targeted Rodgers so much in the mock draft marathon. I was buying the dip. I thought you could get him relatively cheap and you could stack your lineup. You could start with 3 running backs, 2 wide receivers, or vice versa, 2 wide receivers, 3 running backs, and then hit your quarterback with an Aaron Rodgers and be very happy that you're going to have a guy that's going to be competing for top 5. I think he's one of the safer plays at quarterback. And he's just a notch above like a Ryan Tannehill if you want to feel a little bit more confident than drafting a guy like Tannehill for me.
I couldn't agree more. I think he's fine. I think I want to see where his ADP ultimately ends up, because it will be interesting if it starts to creep up with the Josh Allen, because he did finish so high, and you get, these people that are excited about it. Then I probably wouldn't be so much on the same boat. But you're talking like right now, like you said, with being able to stack your other positions and then grab, right now, Aaron Rodgers in those, 6th, 7th, 8th round. I think, even if it doesn't pan out, even if he reverts back to 2 years ago where he wasn't that starting quarterback, I don't think the draft capital is necessarily as much to where you can't maneuver around it. But like you said, we know Aaron Rodgers is a super spiteful guy. We know the contract situation, and we know that he likes to prove people wrong. And so I think that he would go out that way, right? Like I wouldn't expect him to go out, like a noodle arm. I would expect him to go out, slinging the rock and throwing it all over the place and showing people, hey, I still got it.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be on that page. All right. We are moving on to our next 5 quarterbacks for this top 10. Sorry about that. But before we do, I want to say, Whisper Nation, we're nothing without your unwavering support, and we are so proud of this community we have built together. If you feel it upon your heart to help us continue to grow this family and chase this dream, consider joining us over on patreon.com. You can show support at the $5 and $10 levels. The patron benefits include access to our exclusive Discord channels, entries to sport card giveaways, increased odds for landing a spot, which these are going fast in our Listener League 2021, and bonus fantasy content that is only available to patrons. Head on over to patreon.com/The Fantasy Whisperer and join the nation today. Johnny, our number 6 quarterback is Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. His ADP is 806. He's coming off the board as the QB 11 off the board, but we, Johnny, have got him as our QB 6. That's one of our biggest discrepancies in the top 10. We've moved Russell Wilson out. Obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but talk about why we're so high on Jalen Hurts, who went in through a touchdown pass with his first pass in training camp.
Yeah, I was waking up and seeing that news blurb, kicking off summer camp or training camp with Hype Train USA. Let's go. I'm a huge fan of Jalen Hurts this year. I've been preaching this all summer long. I believe he is going to be one of those quarterbacks that, people are going to be drafting in the 9th, 10th round. Sometimes he gets into that 8th round, but mostly in the mock drafts, he was 9th or 10th in a single quarterback league. And he has the upside, just like anybody else, because of the Konami code, because of his rushing ability, and what we've seen from him as far as in the limited action, right? Travis had 3 rushing touchdowns in 4 games. 2 of those did come on 1 game. So some people might say, oh, that was a little bit fluky. But even if you're saying he's had 2 rushing touchdowns in 4 games, that's pretty significant. You're talking about those rushing touchdowns, and that's what elevates these guys into that top 5 is that rushing upside. Now, he does have a big arm, and he's more accurate than what he depicted last year. They got some offensive weapons. You're talking about getting Smith over there, the rookie, who I think is going to help him out a lot. I think moving Rieger over to that number 2 spot is going to also help as well. Spread out the field, stretch out the field. They're not using him as the number 1. And I think, getting a lot of this offensive line healthy. And then the one thing I really like is, we talked about it on the mock draft marathon. The offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert last year, who everyone is very high on Justin Herbert this year. Well, that offensive coordinator is now the offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts, and I expect him to do as much for Jalen Hurts as he did for Herbert. And so once again, you kind of want to get ahead of these waves, not get behind them, and because you'll be paddling too late. So I do believe that Jalen Hurts is going to be a guy that will help you win your fantasy league this year. He will be on a lot of my rosters coming up this season because I love his value. I love the upside. And then you're just talking about the schedule, strength of schedule. Now, this will change throughout the season, but as of right now, especially those first 5 games, which you really want to get off to a nice head start, he's got one of the top 5 easiest schedules as far as the first 5 games. So I believe in Jalen Hurts. I think people who draft him are going to be very, very pleasantly surprised if they're able to get him on their roster and what he could do for their roster. He has tremendous upside.
Yeah, Hurts is one of those guys that's definitely a league winner. We've talked about it this offseason already, just the Konami code in himself. We saw multiple top 10 finishes last year. He was averaging a top 10 finish in the very brief sample size. He should have an increased ability to do so with the talent around him, hopefully being better, the offensive line, hopefully staying healthier. And right now, I just wanted to point out we've got nearly 15 of you watching, only a couple likes on YouTube. Let's get those likes up. Appreciate that. But I do really appreciate the take here on Jalen Hurts, Johnny, because I think this is the one guy sitting within this realm that's like kind of a weird guy. As far as you're considering like, oh, do I really want Jalen Hurts? They've been so weird about it. They're talking about maybe trading for Deshaun Watson. Whatever, buy that in. The cost for Jalen Hurts is not as much as these other guys we've talked about so far, which means if you could buy him and then end up having to stream other guys because of what happens, let's say they do trade for Deshaun Watson. I don't know if that's going to happen, but let's say they do, then you'll be sitting there fine. It doesn't affect your roster as much. Whereas if you went for a Josh Allen because you're swinging for the fences for him to repeat, that really hurts your roster based on the way you've constructed it in fantasy football. And so for me, I think Jalen Hurts is that perfect guy to attack to try and win your league as one of the later quarterbacks.
And the last thing I just want to, reiterate is whether it is for Houston or whether it's for the Eagles, I think it will be the Eagles this year. Both of those defenses are very bad. People talk about Dak's, and Dallas's defense bad, so they'll be throwing, they'll be trying to, stay in games. Well, the same is going to be for the Eagles, and for, if he does end up going to Houston, then both of those defenses are bad. So he's going to have to continue to chuck the ball around, and that's what you like.
All right, so another quarterback we like is Dak Prescott right now. He's coming off the board as the 5th quarterback in consensus ADP in the 5th round at 505, but we've got him as our number 7, just slightly behind a couple other guys here. Last 2 years has been a QB1 on 65% of his starts. Prior to last year, he was a top 2nd year under Mike McCarthy. After having 3 straight years of 6 rushing touchdowns, he's had back-to-back years of 3 rushing touchdowns, obviously last year with the injury. We talked about the top of the show, Kyler's points per game being one of the best in 2020. So was Dak Prescott's one of the best in 2020 in that small sample size. Nothing's changed here except for maybe CeeDee Lamb's gotten a little bit better. This offensive line will now be fully back together. Zeke seems to be in better condition than he's been in the last previous years. So for me, Dak is a smash at ADP, Johnny, but we have him just slightly a little bit below some of these other guys. Do you think that's just the product of QBs being so deep, or do you think it's a situation where you have been fading Dak because of the ankle injury?
It's basically the ankle injury, right? When I'm factoring in, into the stats and where, because the reality is, how do you get to that number 2 or number 1 overall? Now, you can throw for a lot for sure. And can Dak do that? Absolutely. They have the weapons to do so. But what really sets it up there is that rushing upside. And Dak, 3 straight years where he had 6 rushing touchdowns, and then back-to-back seasons where he only had 3. Now, of course, he did get injured last year. He was on pace to get more than 3 rushing touchdowns. However, with the ankle injury, that's something I'm going to continue to monitor. Does he favor that? Do they tend to, run a little bit more with Zeke in the red zone because of that? They don't want to. And we've also seen hesitancy from players when they come back from, ACL or MCL injuries or, any kind of injury where they just naturally will. And we saw this, with David Johnson a few years ago in the wrist, right? He kind of favored that a little bit, and he was a little less hesitant when he was going in for tackles. And so it's just something natural when you go through something catastrophic like Dak did, you will tend to, do that. You'll tend to not run it as much because you're a little bit worried about, hey, could this happen again? And I'm not saying that he can't completely get over it. I do think as the season goes on, as his career goes on, he'll be completely fine.
Johnny's like, hey, rub some dirt on it and just
get
exactly.
Over it,
dude.
Yeah, exactly. Or what did Tony Romo say when it happened?
The cramp.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like a cramp. I was like,
that was the gnarliest cramp I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. So
that is something that needs to be factored in. Despite all the reports that have come out that Dak will be ahead of schedule, he'll be fine. He seems to be fine. I think the biggest thing we could probably take from this is they may ease Dak in this season. He might start week 1, but do they go run heavy? Do they go Zeke? And so then it just doubles me down on my Zeke take, where I think Zeke is coming off the board still a little too late in the middle of the first round. I think he belongs in the top 5. And this could be something that lines up with that if we're buying into the narrative that Dak's going to need a little bit of more time than we think.
And I just, in the mock draft, I was taking Dak a lot because of where he was falling, especially if you're in like one of those 1, 2, or 3 picks, because he's usually falling at the end of that, 4th round or beginning of the 5th. Sometimes I was able to grab him in the 6th. And depending on, the league and what you have. And for me, the upside is definitely there at that pick. You're talking about, could he repeat, because in 2019, he was the QB2 overall, and he didn't have, he only had 3 rushing touchdowns, and he had the fewest rushing attempts he had up to that point. And so, yes, once again, he can definitely get there by just throwing it. But you want to talk about consistency and feeling good about your pick and saying, yeah, this guy definitely has that upside. I tend to have that question mark kind of in the back of my head to that question, whereas I don't have that with, Kyler or Josh Allen. So that's where I'm at. But, if I'm walking away with Dak in my drafts, in the 5th round, I'm pretty happy with that because he definitely has the upside.
All right, Ryan Tannehill is our 8th quarterback coming
baby.
up our ranking, and this one is definitely a guy we've been monitoring since the Julio Jones trade, and even before. We thought he was a guy that could be worth targeting because he's just been vastly underrated in his career in fantasy football since going to the Titans. Now Ryan Tannehill still sitting at 905 as the QB 13 off consensus. We have him as the QB 8, firmly within our top 10. So if you're asking, how could you have guys like Russell Wilson not in here? This is what we're talking about. Guys like Ryan Tannehill for us are cutting, are more we're more confident in coming into the season. Johnny, I'll let you take this away on why we're so confident on Ryan Tannehill.
Yeah, so this is a combination of two things, right? We talked about at the top of the show, Patrick Mahomes, 65% of his weekly games over the last 2 years has he been a top 12 fantasy quarterback. Well, you look at Ryan Tannehill, and kudos to Travis because he was the hound that started getting on this scent, and then I just followed it with him and revealed that Ryan Tannehill, although his name doesn't scare put fear into your opponents or anything like that, you can, and when you draft him, in your draft season, like we are highly encouraging people to do, he's one of my favorite quarterbacks to target this year because of his week-to-week consistency. And 2, you talked about the added weapon in Julio Jones, what that could do. Now, he was able to be a top 7 quarterback last year when he had Corey Davis and an injured A.J. Brown. Now he gets a fully healthy A.J. Brown and a Julio Jones. Do monitor, though. Julio Jones is still somewhat dealing with that hamstring injury, so we need to keep that monitored as that progresses. We don't know how that will, affect this preseason or him going into the season. But either way, Ryan Tannehill, sneaky upside as far as rushing. He's always been a guy who isn't afraid to pull down the ball and run. One of the reasons why Derrick Henry doesn't have a ton of receptions out of the backfield, because we generally know quarterbacks who like to scramble would rather scramble and pick up the few yards than dump it off. And so you're looking at a guy in Ryan Tannehill who checks off all the boxes for me. He's consistent. He, will run. He has the rushing upside. He'll get rushing touchdowns as well in the red zone. 6 rushing touchdowns last year. I believe he can repeat that. And
Good
he's just such a
cast.
it's great supporting cast.
Yeah, I think there's like you said, there's a ton of boxes to be checked. Tannehill does what he does, and he's sneaky good. Once again, we were talking about, okay, if you want to kind of pass on the other guys and go with a Jalen Hurts to win your league, you could even pass a little bit further and go with a Ryan Tannehill. If we're looking at 2 quarterback leagues, Ryan Tannehill is a great value if you're going later. There's just all sorts of reasons to be on Tannehill this year, and we wanted to point that out and put him firmly within our top 10.
I don't even mind because of their ADP, Travis, and most other people might not tell you to do this, but I'll tell you to do it if you want to go down this route. Grab both of them. Grab Jalen and grab Ryan Tannehill. I did it in a couple of mock drafts, even if it's a single quarterback league, because you got your consistency guy in Ryan Tannehill, and then you got your really high upside guy in Jalen Hurts. And if Jalen Hurts really pops off, you can either stick with him or you can trade him away before his schedule gets a little bit more difficult in the middle of the season. And then you got an asset for a quarterback, and you've also got a very consistent quarterback in Ryan Tannehill. Love that strategy.
All right, we're going to bring out our top 10 with, our number 9 is Matt Stafford going off the board at 7-12, QB 11. I think the bottom line here is that Stafford has been projected to be top 8 over the last few years in Detroit, and we really like the weapons in Los Angeles a whole lot better than we've liked Detroit over the last few years. There's a lot to be had here. Plus the Cam Akers injury, Johnny, could mean that Matt Stafford is poised to throw even more than we thought over with the Rams. How are you feeling about Matt Stafford firmly within our top 10 at number 9? You think he's worth taking, especially at ADP of QB 11 coming off the board in the 7th round of drafts?
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising, right? That more people aren't on the Matthew Stafford bandwagon. I do think that he is going to be a very good quarterback for fantasy. I think this is probably going to be his best year he's going to have. Talk about Sean McVay and that offense. Talk about Cam Akers going down. I do expect, and especially with their talk, they're not going to bring in another another running back as of now. And so you would say, okay, well, there are question marks with Henderson, whether he can handle that workload. Well, how do you balance that? Well, you would throw a little bit more. And, that was something that we were already talking about prior to the Akers injury. I expected them to throw a little bit more because the reality was they were giving Akers 22 to 25 touches a game. And, Goff was just throwing, 25 to 30 times a game. And I don't see that happening again. I do expect it to be a little bit more in Stafford's favor. The one thing I do want to end this argument on and why you should somewhat be a believer in Matthew Stafford, and that is that Jared Goff, who we always talk about, stepmom Lauren calls him the Prius of quarterbacks for the NFL. Well, the Prius of Prius of quarterbacks for the NFL was able to finish as a top 10 quarterback 10 times in the last 2 seasons. Now, that doesn't sound like a significant amount of time of games, but it's Jared Goff. And then you look at what Stafford has done during that span. He's had 8 top 10 finishes during that span, but he has played in 7 fewer games than Jared Goff. So you definitely see the upside. Once again, if you're later on in these drafts, you didn't get your Kyler Murray, you didn't get Dak, and someone took Hurts or Tannehill, and you miss out on those guys, I think Stafford will be just fine for you as a weekly start. And then you can also, stream at that position because you're not afraid to sit a guy like Stafford for a stream of the week. That's the big caveat.
All right. Our last quarterback, his top 10 is Tom Brady. Terrific Tom, 7-time NFL champion, man. And he did it last year on a torn MCL. He also passed for 4,600 passing yards last year, 5,554 air yards. That was number 1. 40 passing touchdowns. That was second in the NFL, and a 6.6 touchdown rate. We have him as our number 10. There's probably room to move on that. We want to talk about the MCL injury and some things will adjust. Johnny, I guess my biggest question with Brady is if we're so high on Stafford, why wouldn't we be a little bit higher on Brady, given all the weapons he has and giving him showing us that he could do it last year, and then he did that as injured as well. I think Brady is actually even a better target than Stafford as a guy you could get later, and if he ends up finally meeting Father Time, you can kind of ditch him to stream. But I do like Brady as kind of a little bit of edge above Stafford here.
And that's definitely fine as personal preference. Again, it's like I'm not going to doubt Father Time or not doubt Tom Brady anymore. I've already said, I've been on the record saying, hey, if in 10 years we come out and we find that like the NASA comes out and they're like, hey, we actually have put a robot on this planet and they've been acting as a human, and that person's name is Tom Brady, I would not be shocked at all. Like, did you see that video the other day that he released where he's throwing dead center into a jugs machine? Like, it's unreal what this guy does.
That video is fake, though.
Is it?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Did you see he does this on social media? You see the other video where he throws it to the moon and the moon explodes?
Well, yeah, that one.
Yeah,
but
he's got the same, and he tagged some video editor in this video.
Unreal.
Yeah,
because
I was going to say Ian Rappaport did the same thing where he's like, how many takes? And Barstool was like, oh, poor Ian, you think this is real. But that's the thing. Like, that's how good Brady is. We are questioning if he's doctoring these videos or not, or if he's capable of these wild, insane things.
Yeah, like if I did that, if I were to put that on TikTok, it would be totally like people would be like, oh yeah, like this is doctored. But it was Tom Brady.
The fact
and like,
that we question it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But here's what I do want to say. So it's just like, people are going to be wondering this, right? Tom Brady, 8 top 10 finishes last year out of 15. So, right around 50%, a little less than 50%, as far as, or a little bit more, than 50% as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. So again, as you start to look at these, we want to break it down and let you know that all quarterbacks aren't going to finish as a top 10 quarterback on a week-to-week basis. You want to try to find the most consistent one at the best price. And I'm with you. If you would rather go with a guy like Tom Brady over a guy like Stafford, I'm perfectly, I don't have any issues with that. And like you said, if it doesn't pan out or Father Time has eventually caught up to him, then you can easily drop him and pick up another quarterback and stream that quarterback. Because you're paying very little for it, but the upside is definitely there. The upside again is 40 plus touchdowns like he had last year, and even healthier, so it could even go up a little bit more than that. So I don't mind grabbing a guy like Tom Brady later on, because I do tend to like to stream the quarterback position a little bit more, and he does give you that high upside. But it's not the Konami code kind of high floor. He doesn't have that high floor that you like to go into some games like these other quarterbacks give you.
All right. Well, that rounds out our top 10, Johnny. We did it. We're talking Whisper Nation here. Let us know who you think we need to talk about. Obviously, Russell Wilson left out of our top 10, as you guys know, and our running backs, we left Saquon Barkley out. We have reasoning behind that. And Johnny, if you do want to speak to Russell Wilson real quickly, I think it might be a good idea to just hop in here and tell Whisper Nation. I think I'd be right in surmising that Russell Wilson scares us a little bit scares us a lot, because Pete Carroll continues to say that they want to run the football a whole bunch, and they continue to do things where they'll either start the year hot or end the year hot, and either way, it's not projectable for fantasy football. We just have not been able to pin our hat on what we're going to get out of Russell Wilson, and that scares us off a little bit. Why would we take that when we can just take a guy like Dak Prescott or a guy like Ryan Tannehill or a guy like Jalen Hurts and really invest in something that we know they're going to continue to try and throw throughout the year based on their situation? The Seahawks have not shown us anything to think that they're going to let Russ cook the whole entire year. You look at some of the things DK Metcalf has come out and said on video with Brandon Marshall, that half of their playbook was him just going deep or running slants. That's not stuff that really inspires consistency and greatness out of your fantasy football position. So, Johnny, unless you have anything to add there, that's just kind of the reasonings behind some of where we have Russ Wilson.
Yeah, 50% of his games over the last 3 years, he's been pretty consistent on that number. Is 50% of the time he's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback, but the other 50%, he's not. He's 20. He's in the 20s. And then once again, I like to point out that when you're drafting these guys, his draft capital is up there. It's in the 5th round. And then you're talking about only 50% of the time is he going to get you a top 10 finish. That's something I don't like. And then also then you start getting into, hey, do I play him this week or do I play this other player? And it's a lot harder for you to bench a guy who's on the back of the jersey says Russell Wilson when we know the upside. It's harder for you to bench a guy like that or straight up cut him if you need to, if he starts to go cold. That's the issue that I have with Russell, and that's why I lowered him in my rankings. And you touched on it. There has been a couple of signs saying that, hey, they could potentially let Russ cook this year, and going out and getting the offensive coordinator for the Rams, who tends to throw a little bit more. But you also have the coaching philosophy in Pete Carroll, who loves to run the ball, and he's never gone away from that. He had an issue with Russell last year cooking and turning over the ball a lot, and that's why you saw him rein it back and say, no, we're going to start running a little bit more. So like I said, could Russell Wilson come out, light the world on fire? Sure, but will it last the whole season? That's where I have my doubts. So that's why I lowered him a little bit. And the other one I just want to touch on real quick, Travis, before we end the show, is Herbert. Justin Herbert is going to be a name where people are going to be like, well, why didn't you have Justin Herbert in there? And similar to what I was talking about with regression, I pointed this out. I'm not saying they're the same type of person, but the last time we saw a rookie come out, light the world on fire, it was Baker Mayfield. We all bought in. Same kind of situation where new offensive coordinator, we bought into the player, didn't really understand loved the weapons, didn't understand what the situation was as far as the offensive coordinator coming in and what they wanted to implement. And then what ended up happening? Baker burned a lot of people. People were really frustrated with Baker Mayfield. I do believe that we will see, Herbert come back down to earth a little bit this year. And as a result, I think it's going to disappoint people, especially because Herbert's going in the 5th and 4th round. He's coming, he's starting to get real up there. And so that's another player that I expect a little bit of regression from this year.
All right, Whisper Nation, let us know what you think of the top 10 rankings in the chat. Of course, we want to take this last little bit of time, and I wanted to shout out our patrons over at patreon.com. Carl Smith, Chris Molina, Brett Johnson, Eric Zubert, Doug Steinbarth, Scott Klafiki, Will Atkinson, Troy, my boy, Troy Rofi, Jonathan Durst, Jacob Bley. All of you make it possible for us to continue to push forward this brand, and we appreciate every single one of you, and we would appreciate it. Anybody that joins Whisper Nation over at patreon.com or just joins us on any platform and gets us a like and subscribe on any platform that we're doing. For Johnny Game Time Hicks, you can find on Twitter at Johnny_Game Time. I am Big Travy. You can find me on Twitter at Big Travy TFW. We are the Fantasy Whispers, and we're out. Peace.
Peace. Right here.
There we go.
That
was a great show. That was it. We will start to get another outro there on that short music outro.
It should be like a longer outro that's like,
yeah,
not
like,
just the,
not just the little, yeah. We'll work on it. We're working on it. I guess we should probably let Whisper Nation know what we're doing, because they're probably like, hey, do these guys realize they're still live? And we do realize we're starting to do a new thing where after shows we are going to hang out for a couple minutes. If you guys have any questions, we'll answer some questions. We'll talk about fun stuff, like different kind of things that's going on behind the scenes. We'll call this the behind the scenes minutes. I don't know. I just made that up.
Yeah. We'll call it something better than that, I'm sure. So
maybe Whisper Nation will know.
But yeah, good show. We're good to be back, getting the vocals a little bit better.
Yeah, they sound much better. They sound way better than the other night. So how'd you feel, dude? Coming off the mock draft marathon? That was
I'm beat, man. Yeah, that was but it was good, man. It was rewarding in so many ways. I mean, obviously all the guests and the people that joined, and we had new patrons. We got new people in the Discord. Discord chat is up to 68 people. So that's amazing. We love that. Just continuing to rock and roll with this thing and continuing to, bring Whisper Nation more and more content. And, camps are starting this week. I was telling you before we got on, we're almost in August, which means, July's almost over and it's time to start drafting, dude.
Travis was worried about it. He was like, man, it's already to the end of July. And I'm like, yeah, stuff's coming at you fast, dude. When you get older, that time just ticks off faster and faster before you know it.
Well, and I feel like I've basically lost Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Not lost, but I've been sleeping, the whole time, just trying to recover. And, Whisper Nation, for those that don't know, I got sick the day of the mock draft marathon, lost my voice throughout the whole thing. And basically I've been sleeping, trying to recover since then. So, but we tried to power through it. And we felt like we put forward a great product. I owe a lot to Johnny and Chelsea and Austin and just the people that kept this thing rolling, and our wonderful guests and our Whisper Nation community. It was amazing. So if you guys weren't able to catch any of that, make sure you go back and catch some of the stream. They're still up there on YouTube, but man, what an amazing event. And it felt so good to be a part of it for our third year in a row.
Yeah, it was really fun having all those guests on, and just, I think the big part was just seeing how much Whisper Nation enjoyed it, and as our guests as well. We had quite a few people say they want to be back on for sure next year, and that's something we wanted to build. We wanted to build an event that people wanted to be a part of, and I think we're putting that together, and hopefully Whisper Nation joins us next year as well again. As we continue to build this brand. But yeah, man, it's awesome hearing like Liz Losa and Adam Rank and, a lot of these people that, we love to look up to when we started out, and seeing them say, hey, I want to come back onto your guys' show, and I like what you guys are doing. That was very humbling. For sure.
And I know Whisper Nation, the freaks that they are, we're asking about a mock draft Monday on Monday. And we, in years past, we have done where we've doubled up and gotten to get on there. But I just think this one was, it was the biggest one we've done, and it took a lot out of us. So we appreciate the patience. We'll be back with a mock draft Monday next Monday. And we'll be starting to book more guests for that as well. Some of the people that weren't able to get on with with the actual mock draft marathon. Wanted to continue to collab with us, so we'll get that working. So
Yeah.
remember to get your draft kit, guys. It's over at thefantasywhispers.com. Remember, if you want to support the show, go over to Patreon. But other than that, man, we'll see you next time. We'll see you this Friday with another show.
Yeah. Take it easy, Whisper Nation. We're out.
Peace.
Peace.
Right here.
Oh, hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw and you want to learn how to dominate your own draft and win your own league, head on over to thefantasywhispers.com and grab your copy of the Fantasy Whispers Draft Kit today, or click the link in the description below. And if you're still not sold, check out one of these videos.